In the specific case of Jack Ma, he also happens to be the former CEO of one of the largest tech companies, if not the largest tech companies in China. Now, these companies are important because of their ability to amass large amounts of data. One of the things that's happening to a lot of these previously, very wealthy business owners and like Jack Ma, former CEOs, is that Xi Jinping is cracking down on all of them. And when he made that statement, he basically made himself an enemy of the Chinese Communist Party.
So I heard it happened to one guy in Hong Kong where he was abducted and taken back. So it happens all over the world too, not just Hong Kong?
Even in the United States. In fact, it was happening regularly during the Obama administration that the Ministry of State Security was essentially going throughout the United States and basically taking Chinese back to China.
I have a problem understanding or relating to, since we're over here in the West, is what is the relationship and the dynamic between businesses in China and the CCP? Because I know there's public or state-owned institutions and private businesses. So what's the relationship there?
So in the beginning, the Chinese Communist Party didn't allow any private businesses. In fact, everything was owned by the government. They went through many phases, particularly when Mao Zedong was still part of the leadership and in charge, the general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. There was no private enterprise allowed whatsoever. And in fact, they had collective communes, really, for people, essentially shared labor to grow their crops. Of course, they had the Great Leap Forward, where people would melt down their dishes, or not their dishes, but their pots and pans, and create pig iron. Of course, that failed massively. And over the time that Mao Zedong was in charge, millions of people, tens of millions of people died in China because of the economy's inability to create enough sustenance for the people. And so after he died, Deng Xiaoping had this, opening up and reform initiative, where he said, it doesn't matter if the cat is white or black as long as it catches mice. So this allowed some limited private sector activity within the Chinese economy. And that slowly progressed and grew and eventually became, what China has been over the last 30 years, which is kind of this mix of authoritarianism and capitalism. But capitalism that's very much constrained by the things that the Chinese Communist Party wants. And so today you have this peculiar mix of very, very wealthy business people that were, under Jiang Zemin, brought into the Chinese Communist Party because they wanted to ensure that these people that were becoming very wealthy within the system were also aligned with the party from a political perspective. Under Xi Jinping, what's happened is a lot of these reforms that began under Deng Xiaoping, continued under Jiang Zemin, slowly began to be unraveled under Hu Jintao, have really just sharply unraveled under Xi Jinping. And that has resulted in the Chinese Communist Party taking a much more direct control over businesses. In fact, now any major business within China, by law, must have a Chinese Communist Party entity within the business to ensure that the company conforms to what the party wants. In the specific case of Jack Ma, he also happens to be the former CEO of one of the largest tech companies, if not the largest tech companies in China. Now, these companies are important because of their ability to amass large amounts of data. And so one of the things that Alibaba was doing, in addition to having a large commercial platform, almost like Amazon, in fact, they made like $38 billion on Singles Day last year. They also started this essentially payments program through Ant Group, and Ant Group was going to, be IPO'd, fairly recently. And prior to the IPO, Jack Ma made some critical statements with regard to financial reform within China. Now, one of the things that's happening to a lot of these previously, very wealthy business owners and like Jack Ma, former CEOs, is that Xi Jinping is cracking down on all of them. And when he made that statement, he basically made himself an enemy of the Chinese Communist Party. So, of course, prior to that, Jack Ma was forced to leave his role as CEO in Alibaba. And now it's reported that nobody has been able to see him for 2 months. So it is likely that he met the same fate as other billionaires have, in that he ran afoul of the party, and he's probably most likely in some form of house arrest somewhere within China, where he's no longer allowed to leave the confines of his living space.
So a report came out recently that there was a rumor that he was laying low, but you think it's more likely house arrest?
Well, he could be laying low, but it seems awfully improbable that he would cease all, appearances in public voluntarily. I mean, he is one of the richest guys in China. He's also well respected as an entrepreneur and innovator. So the idea that he would just stop all of a sudden being public, possible, but it is more likely that he, met the fate of many other billionaires under Xi Jinping, which is he was forced into some kind of lockdown. Now, just recently, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but we had another billionaire, and perhaps you remember the name, that was convicted of writing a letter that was critical of Xi Jinping. This is really in regards to the coronavirus. He has been convicted of being, I think, against the Communist Party, and so he's actually locked up now.
Yeah, I remember reading about that. So another thing I read is that most of the billionaires were minted starting from like the early 2000s. And I guess that's when the CCP started really cracking down on them because they started gaining too much power. Is that the case, or what's that situation?
Well, no, I mean, really the early 2000s, that's when China entered the WTO. So it was really a boom time. And, so I got to China in 2002. It was still, I think Jiang Zemin was still in power. And then, or Hu Jintao had only recently come into power. And so it was still relatively open back then. In fact, China today, if you go and live there, is far different than the China that I lived in back in 2002. I lived there in 2017, and it's far more locked down, far more oppressive an environment. And it's more digitally capable in terms of monitoring the population. So like in Beijing, there's 2 cameras for every individual. And I have some really interesting anecdotes about how capable the system is in tracking people and ensuring that they're doing things properly.
So if you're like an entrepreneur in China or you want to be one, are they aware that this is the situation, that if you speak out of line with a business, they can just like crack down on you? Or is it more of a naive that it's not going to happen to me, or they wouldn't do that? What do you think?
Well, I think it's more along the lines of the way that the Chinese Communist Party system works is they want to give you some amount of freedom because that unlocks economic activity. Your pursuit of wealth as an individual actually is the force that Deng Xiaoping unleashed. Now, what comes with opening up and giving people a little bit of freedom as they begin to take that freedom farther than the Chinese Communist Party is willing to allow. And so in the case of these entrepreneurs, innovators, these CEOs, these tech CEOs, it is likely that they're aware of the challenges to countering the Chinese Communist Party. But, it's one of those things, well, it's never going to happen to me. Yeah, it happened to somebody else, but, it's not going to happen to me because I'm not going to do something that, gets me in trouble. But what happens is, the party, if they recognize somebody as having more, public exposure than, say, the political leaders, in the case of Jack Ma, he was very, very popular. He had a big following. He was a very successful businessman. As that stature becomes, something that could become a political problem for the Chinese Communist Party, it is the case that you might do things exactly like you were doing before. In other words, you're not saying anything different or doing anything different. It's just that the party has come to see you as an adversary to the party. And so you may think it's not going to happen to me because I know where the limits are and I am not going to cross that boundary. But what happens is if the party begins to see you as a threat, the limits change, and they may change in a way that's imperceptible to you, that you may not even be aware of. So you may not do anything different than what you did before, but the party has viewed you as an adversary, and then you do something that kind of triggers that reactiveness, and then the party will come after you. And so it is likely that these people aren't trying to get themselves in trouble because they understand the power that the Chinese Communist Party has over the country. It is just that the party has changed its view regarding them. And certainly under Xi Jinping, any business leader now needs to be strictly thinking about the party and how they promote the party and how they're loyal to the party. Now, that is not something that these entrepreneurs like Jack Ma have been used to. They've been used to having more freedom to go out and build their business. That's not the China that exists today.
Right. Because the main question I had was, if you're relatively aware that this is what's going on, like, what would be the motivation to start a business if you know that the CCP can just crack down on you right away at any time?
Well, it's the same motivation that exists in the United States, and that is, if the party deems what you're doing to be in its interests, then the resources of the party and of the country are unlocked for you. So one of the biggest challenges that an entrepreneur has, no matter where you are, whether you're in the United States or in Europe or in China, is access to capital. If you can have access to capital to basically build your ideas as an entrepreneur, you can be successful. Even if your idea isn't that great, enough capital will allow you to essentially create the business that you can eventually become. Not enough capital basically chokes your business. And so in the case of entrepreneurs like Jack Ma, the Chinese Communist Party will unlock access to capital if they see that is in the interest of the Chinese Communist Party. One of the things that the party wants is to ensure full employment in China, because if they ensure full employment, then their legitimacy is maintained. And so that, by enabling entrepreneurs who create jobs in China, they're ensuring their continued control over China. The challenge is when they start to see that entrepreneur is a threat to the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, then they can be taken down a notch. And so, in the meantime, those entrepreneurs are richly rewarded by having preferential treatment from the government in terms of rules and regulations, but also access to capital. And the motivation is, I can get really, really wealthy. And maybe I can get really, really wealthy. I can establish a nest egg outside the country, and maybe I can actually leave the country, as many have. So they've moved their assets out, they've gotten rich, and then they've escaped China. Of course, what China has been doing, and the Chinese Communist Party has been using the Ministry of State Security, which is their equivalent of the CIA, to go around the world and try to abduct these people and bring them back to China. And they've been very successful at doing that.
So I heard it happened to one guy in Hong Kong where he was abducted and taken back. So it happens all over the world too, not just Hong Kong.
Even in the United States. In fact, it was happening regularly during the Obama administration, that the Ministry of State Security was essentially going throughout the United States and basically taking Chinese back to China.
Wow, that's crazy.
It is crazy and scary.
Yeah. I think that's pretty much it for the topic of this video. Was there any closing remarks you wanted to say?
No, I hope you get a lot out of it, and it was useful.
So what did you guys think about this interview? Do you think what they're doing is okay? Would you start a business yourself in China? Let me know in the comments below. If you are new here, we do dangerous conversations just like this one every single week for dangerous minds just like yourselves. So make sure you subscribe because it's free and you can dislike and unsubscribe and leave us your best hate comments whenever you want, so you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. General Robert Spalding's YouTube channel will be linked below, and his amazing book that I really enjoyed reading called Stealth War: China's Silent Takeover While America's Elite Slept. That will be linked in the video description for you guys to check out. Check out the other interviews we've done on the screen right now. Thank you so much for watching. Stay dangerous out there, and we will see you guys in the next one.